The air in the streets of Capernaum was thick with dust and the heat of the midday sun. But Jairus felt only the cold, sharp grip of panic. He ran. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps that burned his throat. He did not look back at the synagogue. He did not look at the people he passed. His daughter, his 12-year-old light, lay motionless on her bed. The distance between the city gate and the center of the square felt like miles. When he saw the crowd, he did not hesitate. He lunged into the wall of bodies, shoving past shoulders and elbows, his hands trembling with a force he could not control. He pushed until the air cleared and he stood in the center of the throng. He did not speak. He did not wait for an acknowledgement. He dropped to his knees, his weight hitting the hard-packed earth with a dull thud. He pressed his forehead against the ground, his body shaking. "My little daughter is dying," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Please, come. Lay your hands on her so she may live." Ha! Jairus remained on the ground, his forehead pressed into the grit, until a shadow fell across him. He looked up. Jesus stood motionless, his face unreadable. Then he simply nodded. The movement was small, but it shattered the paralysis in Jairus' limbs. He scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. Jesus turned and began to walk. Jairus fell into step behind him, his eyes locked on the back of the teacher. The crowd was a dense, shifting wall of bodies. They did not part easily. Shoulders brushed against his, voices rose in a dull, constant roar, and the path ahead seemed to close up as quickly as it opened. Jairus pushed forward, his hands outstretched, clearing a narrow corridor for Jesus to pass. Every step was a struggle against the tide of people. He focused only on the rhythm of the walking feet in front of him. A fragile, glowing coal of hope ignited in his chest. He moved faster, his breath hitching, his gaze darting between the path and the house that felt miles away. They were moving. That was enough. The rhythm of the walk was steady, a lifeline pulling them toward the house. Jairus kept his eyes fixed on the back of the teacher, his pulse sinking with every stride. Then, the flow of the crowd shifted. A ripple moved through the throng, not of people pushing, but of someone reaching out. A hand, thin and trembling, darted from the side and brushed the hem of the garment. Jesus stopped. He did not stumble. He did not hesitate. He simply ceased to move. The sudden stillness was like a wall. Jairus skidded to a halt, his momentum carrying him forward until he nearly collided with the teacher. He looked around, his chest tight, waiting for the movement to resume. It did not. Jesus turned, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the pressing crowd, searching for the one who had touched him. The air in the street seemed to thicken. Jairus felt the seconds dragging, each one a sharp, cold needle against his skin. He looked at the houses passing by, then back at the motionless figure of the teacher. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his own hands to keep from screaming. The world had stopped. The street noise seemed to retreat into a dull, rhythmic thrumming in his ears. Jesus was speaking now, his voice low and steady, directed entirely toward the woman who had reached out. Jairus stood frozen, his body coiled with the urge to bolt, yet he remained anchored by the sheer weight of the moment. He watched the teacher's lips move, each syllable a hammer blow against his resolve. He looked at the woman, then back at the path ahead, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped his own palms. The air felt thin, stripped of oxygen. He shifted his weight, his boots scraping against the uneven stone, hoping to catch Jesus' attention, but the teacher did not turn. The woman spoke, her words lost in the press of the crowd, and Jesus nodded again. Every second that ticked by was a fragment of his daughter's life slipping away. He wanted to scream, to reach out and pull the teacher forward by the arm, but his muscles refused to obey. He was a prisoner of this delay. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that mirrored the terrifying uncertainty of the hour. The window of time was closing. The crowd parted, not for the teacher, but for three men pushing against the tide of bodies. They moved with a grim, singular purpose that cut through the noise of the street. Jairus saw them before they reached him, their faces drawn, eyes hollowed by a sight he refused to name. They stopped only when they were inches from his chest. The lead messenger did not look at Jesus. He looked only at the Father. "Your daughter is dead," he whispered. The words were not loud, yet they struck with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of Jairus' lungs, leaving him hollow. The street, the crowd, the sunlight, everything tilted. The color bled from his vision, leaving only the sharp, jagged edges of the truth. He tried to draw a breath, but his throat had tightened into a knot. The messengers stepped back, their duty done, their eyes heavy with the finality of what they had seen in that silent room at home. "Why trouble the teacher any further?" one of them added, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Jairus felt his knees weaken. The hope that had been a burning coal in his chest sputtered and died, leaving behind only the cold, gray ash of grief. The world had ended, and the silence that followed was absolute. Jairus stood motionless, the words of the messengers still echoing in the hollow space of his chest. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as if the earth itself had lost its purpose. Then, a presence moved. Jesus stepped directly into his line of vision, effectively erasing the messengers from the scene. He did not look at the men who had brought the news. He looked only at the Father. "Do not fear," Jesus said, his voice cutting through the surrounding noise with a steady, iron-like firmness. "Only believe." The command was a physical anchor in the storm of Jairus' disbelief. They moved forward, the crowd parting as if pushed by an unseen force. The distance to the house, once a path of hope, now felt like a march toward a tomb. As they reached the threshold, the air changed. It was no longer the dusty heat of the street, but a thick, heavy atmosphere saturated with the shrill, rhythmic wailing of mourners. The sound was a jagged blade, cutting through the quiet resolve Jesus had just instilled. Jesus reached for the door, his hand firm against the wood. He pushed it open, and the clash of weeping spilled out, meeting the stillness of the room inside. The stage was set, the reality of death confronting the promise of the teacher. Jesus stepped into the center of the room, his presence forcing the wailing to falter. "Why this commotion?" he asked, his voice steady against the rising tide of noise. "The child is not dead, but sleeping." A ripple of sharp, mocking laughter broke out, the sound jagged and cruel. Jesus did not argue. He gestured, a single, firm motion that cleared the room of the mourners, until only the parents and 3 disciples remained. The heavy, rhythmic weeping vanished, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Jesus walked to the bedside. The room was still, save for the faint, distant whistle of the wind against the shutters. He reached out, his hand steady, and took the girl's cold, limp fingers in his own. The contrast was absolute, the warmth of life, meeting the stillness of the end. He leaned close, his voice a low, resonant command. "Talitha Kumi," he said. "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The silence shattered. A sharp, sudden intake of breath filled the room. The girl's eyelids fluttered, then opened wide. She sat up, her eyes blinking against the dim light. Color rushed into her cheeks like a tide returning to a dry shore. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and stood, the power of death broken in an instant. The room held its breath. The girl stood, her feet firm against the floor. The stillness of the bed now a memory. Jairus and his wife stood frozen, their hands pressed hard against their mouths to stifle the sound of their own gasps. Tears streamed down their faces, tracing paths through the dust of the day. They did not move, as if stepping forward might shatter the fragile reality. Jesus watched them, his expression calm and steady. He turned slightly, pointing toward the table near the wall. "Give her something to eat," he said. The command was simple, stripped of all mystery. It was a request for bread, for sustenance. The mundane nature of the instruction acted like a weight, anchoring the miracle to the floor. The girl blinked, her gaze shifting toward the table. Her parents moved then, their hesitation breaking into a rush of motion. They reached for her, their hands trembling, touching her arms. Jairus looked at Jesus, his chest heaving with a profound, trembling awe. He had found the master of life itself, standing in his home. The miracle did not stay confined to the walls of the house. It rippled outward, carried by the breath of those who witnessed the impossible. Every life that feels the sharp sting of loss, every heart that has stood before a closed door and felt the weight of finality, finds a reflection in that room. When the world declares that the hour is too late, when the pulse of hope feels like a flickering candle in a gale, the command remains unchanged. It is a steady, resonant sound that cuts through the noise of doubt. Do not fear, only believe. The one who reached out to take a cold, limp hand in his own is the same one who waits for those who, in their deepest desperation, fall at his feet. The silence that followed the miracle was not empty. It was full of the promise that death does not have the final word. It is a quiet, persistent truth that echoes into the present moment. For anyone standing in the shadow of a long night, the path forward is marked by that same, simple, profound trust. The fear that once drove a father to run through the streets of Capernaum is replaced by a calm, enduring certainty. The story does not end with the closing of a door. It continues in every breath taken in defiance of despair, in every step taken toward the light, and in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that even the deepest winter eventually yields to the warmth of the sun. Believe and walk forward.